One of the world's most volatile regions is now emerging as one of the fastest growing economies. Joining us from New York is Africa 54 business correspondent Jill Malandrino. Jill, how are you today?
Doing well, thank you, Esther. So last week we featured a report on the Universal African Passport, which would allow for more liberal and open economic policies across the continent in an effort to increase trade among the states and exports around the world. We also looked at many studies from groups like the IMF, World Bank, and Trademark East Africa that showed countries like Kenya, Uganda, and Rwanda are benefiting from progressive reform. Interestingly, the countries that make up the Horn of Africa, Ethiopia, Djibouti, Eritrea, and Somalia, are emerging as economic leaders, despite regional volatility that they've seen over the past 25 years, with Ethiopia leading the way.
You know, Jill, that's very interesting because a lot of what we hear from the Horn of Africa is a little chaotic. But what is Ethiopia doing right that has increased this cross-border trade? And has that helped increase the regional growth in the Horn of Africa?
Well, according to the World Bank, Ethiopia's economy has experienced strong and broad-based growth over the past decade, averaging 10.8% per year compared to the regional average of 5%. Expansion of the services and agricultural sectors account for most of the growth. Private consumption and public investment explain the demand-side growth, with the latter assuming an increasingly important role in recent years. Ethiopia has learned it cannot flourish in isolation and must interact with its neighbors, if for nothing else so that the landlocked country can reach the sea. A study in African business points out that Djibouti and Ethiopia are doing a great job together, and that's because there's infrastructure integration between the two, lots of trade, and the governments are working towards a common agenda for developing a long-term vision.
And Jill, it does sound like the regional trading blocs are now beginning to make a lot of sense on the continent of Africa.
Well, with anything, economic challenges do exist, especially in Africa, where many nations have gained independence just in the past 20 to 30 years. Eritrea gained independence from Ethiopia in 1993, following one of the longest-running civil wars in African history, close to 30 years, and legacy disputes still exist. Relations between Ethiopia and Somalia are not as bad, but they are not that cordial either. That said, I am cautiously optimistic about the Horn of Africa bloc. Regional groupings have more clout, and as some suggest, could one day be the basis of a continental free trade area, which brings us back to the concept we spoke about last week of a universal African passport.
Jill, fantastic reporting there. Thank you.
Thank you.
Jill Malandrino is Africa 54 business correspondent, reporting live from our New York studios.